The call came at 7 in the morning, and Nadia had already been awake for 2 hours. She stood at the stainless steel counter of the shared commercial kitchen on Grover Street, her hands moving through the motions of wrapping 50 individual pastry parcels in parchment. Her fingers knew the folds without instruction. Her mind was somewhere quieter, somewhere behind her own eyes, moving through the day's checklist the way other people moved through prayers. Tonight was Elena's engagement party. 120 guests. Rooftop terrace. Champagne service at 7, seated dinner at 8:30. Nadia had done harder things in worse conditions, and she had done them alone, and she had not failed once. That was the thing about Nadia Cole. She did not fail. She had simply, at some point, stopped attempting anything large enough that failure was an option. She was 29 years old. She had brown hair she wore in a low braid when she worked, a way of standing that suggested she was always ready to move to the next task, and a face that strangers described as kind and that people who knew her described differently, in quieter moments, as guarded. She had started Cole's Catering 3 years ago with a borrowed industrial mixer, a contact list built entirely from cold calls, and a stubbornness that her best friend Elena called remarkable and that Nadia called necessity. The business was real now. It had a logo. It had a staff of 4, plus Nadia herself. It had a website with photographs that a client's nephew had taken in exchange for a free meal. It was not large. It was not the kind of thing anyone wrote about in a magazine. But it was hers, in the way that only things built from scratch with no help and no net are ever truly yours. She had made it out of the years after Marcus, and that was the only way she ever thought about it, the years after Marcus. The years after the end of what had been, briefly and catastrophically, the thing she had organized her hopes around. She didn't think about him most days. That was progress. That was the result of 2 years of choosing, every single morning, to put one thing in front of the next thing until eventually the days began to feel like a life rather than a waiting room. She had built herself a quiet routine and a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a building on Crane Avenue, and she had a cat named Harold who treated her with complete indifference, and she had Elena, who was the only person left from before who had chosen to stay, and she had this kitchen and this work and the specific satisfaction of being very good at something people relied on. It was not a large life. It fit her exactly. She finished the last pastry parcel at 7:43, covered the tray, slid it into the lower reach-in refrigerator, and straightened up. Her back gave a familiar complaint. She ignored it with the ease of long practice. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Elena: "You're the most important person at this party tonight, just so you know." Nadia read it twice. She typed back, "I'm the caterer, L. That means I'm the most invisible person there." Elena's reply came before Nadia had set the phone down, "Invisible my foot. You're the reason it works." Then a row of small heart symbols that Nadia found embarrassing and necessary in equal measure. Elena Marsh was getting married in 4 months to a quiet accountant named Owen, who loved her with the uncomplicated devotion of someone who had recognized a good thing and never once questioned his luck. Owen was steady and warm and had once driven 40 minutes in a thunderstorm to bring Elena soup when she had a cold, and Nadia thought he was probably the best person she had met in some years. She was genuinely happy for Elena in the way that is not complicated by any bitterness, which had not always been the case and which she considered one of her better achievements. The engagement party was being held at the Korolev Grand, a hotel on Whitmore Street that had opened 2 years ago and that had become, in that time, the kind of place people paid to be seen in. It was beautiful in the way that money makes things beautiful, confidently, without apology. The rooftop terrace was booked. Elena had asked Nadia to handle the catering as her gift to them, and Nadia had said yes before the sentence was finished. She had been in the hotel kitchen twice already for walkthroughs. The head of catering there, a brisk woman named Donna, had treated her with the professional neutrality of someone who had seen 100 outside vendors come through and had stopped expecting anything remarkable. Nadia had won her over by the end of the second visit with an unbothered competence that Donna, who respected competence above almost everything else, could not pretend not to notice. What Nadia had not paid much attention to was the name of the hotel's owner. It appeared in a small brass plaque near the entrance lobby. It appeared in the watermark on the venue stationery. She had noticed it the way you notice the year on a coin, peripherally, without interest. She was here for the kitchen logistics, not for ownership history. She loaded the first of 3 insulated transport bins into the back of her van at 9:15 and checked the folded timeline on the passenger seat. She had written it by hand, the way she always did. There was something about handwriting a timeline that made it real in a way that a screen could not. She could feel the hours as weight when she held the paper. The van pulled into traffic and Nadia drove the way she did everything else in those years, steadily, without drama, already thinking about what came next. She had no way of knowing, on that ordinary morning in that ordinary van, that this particular evening was not going to end the way she had planned it. She had no way of knowing that Marcus Webb and his fiancée would be on the guest list. She had no way of knowing that a man named Alexei Korolev stood at a window on the 14th floor of his own hotel most mornings, looking at the city the way a person looks at something they have already decided to keep, and that this morning he was already thinking about the party on his rooftop that evening. And she had absolutely no way of knowing that by the time that party was over, the geometry of her life, the careful, contained, miniaturized geometry she had built herself, would never quite fit the same way again. But she drove. And she planned. And Harold the cat, she remembered, needed to be fed before 6. These were the things she knew. These were enough. She had learned, in the years after Marcus, to find enough in small things. She had learned it so well it had started to look like peace. It wasn't peace. She would understand that later. But on that morning, with the transport bins loaded and the timeline on the seat beside her, it was close enough that she could live inside it. And that, for now, was what she did. The rooftop was gold by 7 o'clock. Someone in the hotel's events department had strung low warm lights across the terrace canopy, and they turned the early evening air into something that looked like it had been designed for photographs rather than life. The city spread out below and beyond in every direction, the kind of view that makes people feel briefly important. Guests arrived in 2s and 3s, dressed carefully, voices already pitched at party volume. Nadia was not on the terrace. She was down in the service corridor on the floor below, managing the movement of food with the controlled focus of someone running a small operation in a tight space. 2 of her staff, Danny, who was 19 and reliable, and Priya, who was 26 and better at this than she let on, were moving between the kitchen and the service elevator in a rhythm Nadia had established on paper 3 days earlier and that they were, to their credit, executing precisely. She had been up here for 4 hours already. Her feet knew the floor. Her mind was in about 6 places simultaneously, which was not unusual. At 7:20 she went up to do a check of the canopy situation. The terrace was half full. Elena was near the entrance in a cream dress that made her look like everything that was going right in the world, and Owen was beside her with the particular happiness of a man who keeps needing to confirm that this is real. Nadia caught Elena's eye across the crowd, and Elena pointed at her and mouthed the words "You're incredible," and Nadia shook her head and pointed at the food tray nearest to her, which meant, focus on the compliment later, there is work now. She did one circuit. The champagne was moving correctly. The canapés were landing at the right temperature. The flowers on the long cocktail table were still standing without that sad lean that flowers get after 2 hours in warm air. It was going well. It was genuinely going well. She was on her way back to the service entrance when she heard the laugh. She knew it before she had turned around. Some sounds get into the body and stay there. That laugh, sharp at the start, then widening, designed to carry, had spent enough years in her life that she recognized it the way you recognize a smell from childhood, immediately, physically, before your mind can process and soften it. Marcus Webb was here. He was standing 20 feet away, near the bar, already holding a glass like he had been holding it all his life. He wore a dark jacket and an ease that he had always had, the ease of a person who was certain of the space they occupied. Beside him was a woman Nadia had never seen in person but recognized from the single time she had, 2 years ago on a night she preferred not to think about, looked up his name online and found photographs. Celeste Harding. She was striking in a way that had nothing to do with warmth. Very fair, very composed, the kind of woman who moved through rooms as if she had been briefed in advance on their contents. Her dress was something structured and pale and clearly not off any rack. She had the effortless look of someone whose effort was simply too expensive to be visible. Nadia stood still for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned and walked back toward the service entrance. She spent the next 40 minutes in the corridor and in the kitchen and in the service elevator, and she told herself what she had told herself many times in many versions: he is not important. He is a person from before. This evening is a job and you are doing the job, and when the job is finished you will go home and feed Harold, and that will be the end of it. It worked, the way that kind of self-instruction works, which is to say imperfectly and with effort. At 8:10 she had to go back up. The transition from canopy service to the pre-dinner course meant she needed to be on the floor to coordinate the timing between her staff and the hotel team. She went up in the service elevator, stepped onto the terrace, and moved along the edge of the crowd with her head oriented toward the function rather than the people. She almost made it. Nadia. His voice. Same voice. She had always found his voice pleasant, which was the cruelest part of the whole thing, because the body does not update its reactions as quickly as the mind does. She turned. Marcus was closer than she'd expected, as if he had moved deliberately to intercept her path. Celeste was at his shoulder. And there were people nearby, 4 or 5 of them, faces she half recognized from the shared circle that used to be theirs and was now just a place where his version of events lived unchallenged. "I didn't know you were here," he said, and his face did the thing she had once found charming, the smile that arrived before the words, that made everything feel easier than it was. "Are you?" He looked at the small earpiece she wore for communication with her team, at the black apron around her waist, and he did not finish the question. He just nodded slowly. "Right. You're working." "Yes," she said. He turned slightly toward the people beside him. "This is Nadia. We dated, for a while." A pause, the precise length of a dismissal. "A few years ago now." Another pause. "She does catering." Celeste looked at Nadia the way a person looks at a piece of furniture that has been placed in a slightly odd location. Not unkind. Simply categorizing. "Oh," she said. "You're with the catering team?" "She runs it, actually," said one of the people in the group, Owen's friend, a man named Colin who had always been straightforward and who clearly felt the discomfort in the air and was trying to correct it. Nobody responded to Colin's correction. "Good for you," Marcus said. He said it the way people say phrases they do not mean while meaning every word of them. "Good for you. A small life. A sensible choice. A person who understood her ceiling and found it comfortable." That was what the phrase said, underneath its pleasantness. That was what the entire construction of this moment said: the apron, the earpiece, the contrast between her position and Celeste's, the way he had introduced her as an anecdote from his history. Nadia's hands were occupied. She was holding a clipboard with the evening service timeline. She held it a little tighter. Then Marcus laughed. It was his party laugh, the one that pulled other people into whatever he had decided the joke was. "Do you remember," he said, turning to include the nearby group, "how you used to say you were going to open a restaurant?" He said it fondly. He said it the way you talk about something a child once believed. She had all these plans. He looked back at Nadia. "You were very ambitious." Celeste smiled at the word ambitious. It was the smile of someone who had never needed ambition because she had been born into the thing ambition is for. The people around them laughed softly. Not cruelly. They were not cruel people. But they laughed, because Marcus had framed it as a joke, and because no one wanted to be the person in the group who failed to understand the joke. Nadia did not look at the floor. She looked directly at Marcus. She did not say anything. There was a version of herself that might have spoken, the version that lived in the space between 3 in the morning and sleep, that rehearsed conversations that would never happen, that was brilliant and sharp and had exactly the right words. That version was not available at 8:14 on a terrace in front of 5 people and 115 party guests. What she had, instead, was stillness. She held it. The moment held it. Marcus's smile held for a beat longer than comfortable and then lost some of its confidence, because stillness is more unnerving than argument. It gives a person nothing to push against. "Well," she said, finally. Her voice was level. "Excuse me. I have work to do." And she turned and moved toward the service corridor entrance. She made it exactly 8 steps before she heard Celeste murmur something low to Marcus. She could not hear the words. She heard the tone. She heard the way Marcus chuckled at whatever it was. 8 steps. Then the door. Then the narrow stairwell on the other side of it. She stood in the stairwell for 60 seconds. Her back was against the concrete wall and the noise of the party was muffled on the other side of the door, and she was alone for the first time in 4 hours. Her hands, against the clipboard, were steady. She was glad they were steady. She had not broken. She had not said anything she would regret. She had not given him the satisfaction of a visible wound. But she knew the wound was there. She had spent 2 years building walls around it, and he had walked up to them in 40 seconds and reminded her exactly where they were. She pushed off the wall. She rolled her shoulders once. She went back down the stairs toward the kitchen. At no point, in any of those 60 seconds in the stairwell, did she notice the man who had been standing at the far end of the terrace during the entire exchange. She had not seen him watching. She did not yet know his name. She did not know that he had seen everything. And she did not know that what he had seen, not Marcus, not Celeste, not the social theater of it, but her. Her stillness. Her 8 steps in the door and the lift of her chin before she turned. He had seen that, and something in him, something that was not easily moved, had moved. Nadia went downstairs and finished her job. She did it well. She did not think about Marcus again that evening. Or she tried, very hard, not to. The dessert course had just gone up when the man appeared in the kitchen doorway. Not the hotel kitchen staff. Not a guest who had taken a wrong turn. He was wearing a dark suit that had been made for him, the kind of suit you understand is expensive not because of any visible detail but because of the way it sits, as though the fabric had simply decided to cooperate. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, tall, with the kind of face that was not immediately readable, not cold, not warm, something more careful than either. Donna, the hotel's catering manager, moved toward him immediately. Not in a stopping way. In a greeting way. The way people move toward someone they report to without being told to. "Mr. Korolev," she said. "We weren't expecting, is there something you need?" He said something to her that Nadia couldn't hear from across the kitchen. Donna nodded and glanced, briefly, in Nadia's direction. Nadia had exactly enough time to wonder what that glance meant before she was needed at the elevator and she moved toward it. She did not see him leave the kitchen. At 9:40 she was back on the terrace for the final service check. The dinner was winding down beautifully. The lights were still warm. Elena was laughing at something Owen was saying, the kind of laugh that starts from somewhere real. Nadia felt a clean satisfaction looking at it, the kind of satisfaction that doesn't need anything added to it. She was about to turn back when someone stepped beside her. Not in front of her. Beside her. At the railing, a foot to her right, looking out at the city the same direction she had been looking. "You've been running this entire evening," the man said, "and you haven't stopped moving once." It was not a question or a compliment. It was an observation, delivered with the calm of someone who had been watching long enough to have noted it accurately. She turned. It was the man from the kitchen doorway. Up close he was more precise than he had seemed across a room, dark eyes, a stillness about the way he held himself that was not tension but something else, something more chosen. "I'm working," she said, because it was true and because she was not, in that moment, sure what other response made sense. "I know," he said. "I was in the kitchen earlier. You noticed and then you didn't stop to think about it. That's a rare quality." She looked at him for a moment. "You're the owner?" "Yes." "Alexei Korolev?" "Yes." She looked back at the terrace. "I hope the evening has been to your standard." "Better than," he said. Then, after a pause, "You handled something earlier that most people would have handled differently." She went still. Not visibly, she had practice at stillness, but something in her changed. "I don't know what you mean," she said. It was a lie and they both knew it. He didn't push it. He looked at the city for a moment, then back at her. "Are you all right?" Nobody had asked her that. Not Elena, who hadn't seen it. Not Donna, who hadn't known to. Not any of her staff. Nobody at the party. The question arrived so directly and so without performance that it caught her in the throat for a second before she managed to answer it. "I'm fine," she said. "Thank you." He nodded once, as if that was the answer he'd expected and as if he believed approximately half of it. Then he said, "I'd like to introduce you to someone," and before she had a chance to understand what that meant, he had turned slightly toward the nearest cluster of guests and said easily, without raising his voice, "Arthur." A man in his 50s with silver hair and the relaxed manner of someone who had stopped needing to prove things decades ago turned from his conversation. Arthur Venn. Nadia recognized the name from the business pages, commercial property, a lot of it, the quiet kind of influential. "Arthur, this is Nadia Cole. She runs Cole's Catering. The evening is her work." He said it simply. No ceremony. Just, "This is a person of consequence, here is why. She's been kind enough to oversee tonight as a personal favor to me." Arthur Venn shook her hand with the directness of someone whose time was worth something and who had decided, based on the introduction alone, that hers was too. "Wonderful evening," he said. "We have a company dinner in October. Something substantial. Are you available for a conversation?" She had the presence of mind to say yes and to produce a card from the pocket of her apron, which she always had there for exactly this kind of moment, though this kind of moment had never, until now, arrived in quite this way. Arthur Venn took the card, said something appreciative, and returned to his conversation. Nadia turned to look at Alexei Korolev. He was watching her with an expression that was almost amused. "Almost. You didn't have to do that," she said. "No," he agreed. "Why did you?" He considered the question seriously, the way someone considers a question they have already thought about. "Because the story in that room, an hour ago, was incorrect. And I have a strong objection to incorrect stories." She did not know what to do with that. She looked away toward the city. "Also," he added, "Arthur needs a caterer for October and you are clearly the best option." The matter-of-factness of it almost made her laugh. She pressed it down. She became aware, in the next moment, that Marcus and Celeste were 15 feet away. They had turned from their conversation and were now looking at her and at the man standing beside her, with an attention that was entirely different from the attention of an hour ago. Celeste's composed expression had taken on a slight quality of reassessment. Marcus was doing the thing he did when he encountered something that required recalibration. He was smiling while his eyes did the opposite. Nadia did not look at them for long. She didn't need to. She had registered it, and registering it was enough. She turned back toward the service entrance. "I need to coordinate the close-out," she said. "Of course," Alexei said. She took 2 steps, then turned back despite herself. The introduction to Arthur Venn, was that genuine? Or was it a performance for the people who were watching? He looked at her without any change of expression. It was genuine, he said. The people watching were not relevant to it. She looked at him for a second longer than she had intended to. Then she nodded once and went back to work. She spent the next hour in the closeout, wrapping the remaining food correctly, managing the breakdown of the service stations, checking out with Donna, making sure Danny and Priya got their things together. She did all of it with the same focus she brought to everything, but somewhere underneath it, in the place she usually kept very well organized and contained, something had shifted slightly off its usual arrangement. Not him, specifically. Not yet. It was simpler than that. It was the thing he had said, the story in that room was incorrect. She had been telling herself versions of that story for 2 years, that Marcus's version was just his version, that it didn't matter, that she was fine, that the life she had was the life she had chosen freely and not because she had been reduced and hadn't known how to expand again. She had told herself that story until it had become the furniture of her days. And this stranger, this composed, watchful man whose name was on the building, had named it, in 8 words, as what it was. Incorrect. She finished the closeout. She rode the service elevator down with Priya, who was too tired to talk much, which was exactly what Nadia needed. In the lobby she spoke briefly with Donna, who told her, with the professional brevity of someone who did not give compliments easily, that it had been a well-run evening. Nadia thanked her. She was almost to the exit when Elena appeared, slightly flushed, very happy, pulling her into a hug that communicated everything and articulated nothing. Tonight was perfect, Elena said. You were perfect, Nadia said, and meant it. I saw you talking to someone near the railing, Elena said, with a tone that was trying very hard to be casual and failing. Tall, very. The hotel owner, Nadia said. He wanted to introduce me to a potential client. Elena gave her the look that she had been giving her for 11 years, the look that meant, that is a very efficient explanation and it is also not the whole story. It's late, Nadia said. Nadia. I'm going to go feed Harold. She left before Elena could say the name she had not yet said, the name that Nadia suspected Elena had been holding carefully all evening, which was Marcus. Outside, the night air was cool and direct on her face. She found her van in the service bay and sat behind the wheel for a moment without starting it. She thought about the terrace. The champagne glasses and the gold lights and the city below all of it, and Marcus's voice saying the word ambitious the way you say the word naive, and Celeste's small careful smile, and Colin trying to correct things that had gone too far past correcting, and 8 steps in a door and 60 seconds in a stairwell. She thought about a man standing beside her at a railing, not in front of her, and the specific quality of his attention, not the kind that diminishes, but the kind that records. The kind that registers things accurately and does not editorialize. The story was incorrect, he had said. She put her hands on the wheel. She thought, not for the first time, about what it would feel like to tell a different one. Then she started the van. The drive home took 20 minutes. She parked, carried the last bin upstairs, fed Harold, who regarded her arrival with total disinterest and then consumed his food with dedicated focus. She stood in her kitchen in the quiet of the apartment and drank a glass of water. On the counter, beside her keys, was the card that Arthur Venn had given her in return for her own, a reflex of his, a small cream card with just a name and a number, the kind of card that understands itself to be sufficient. She picked it up. Set it back down. She went to bed. She lay in the dark for a while and did not think about Marcus, which she was good at, and she did not think about Alexei Korolev, which she was not yet practiced at. She thought instead about October, about the possibility of a contract that was larger than anything she had handled before, about what it would mean for the business, about logistics and staffing and equipment. She thought about those things for as long as she could. Then she stopped thinking about them and looked at the ceiling and thought about a man saying the story is incorrect with the quiet certainty of someone who has decided that accuracy matters, and who has never learned to be comfortable with the alternative. She fell asleep somewhere around midnight. When she woke early, to her usual alarm, the first thing she did was check her phone. There was a message from an unknown number. It had arrived at 10:50 the night before. It said, "The October event is real. Donna will be in touch with details on Monday if you're interested. AK." She read it twice. Put the phone face down on the nightstand. Lay there for a moment. Then she picked it up again and read it a third time. She did not reply. Not yet. She was a person who thought before she moved. She was beginning to understand, a person who had spent 2 years confusing thinking with hiding. The difference, on that particular morning, felt important. She got up, made coffee, and stood at her kitchen window looking down at Crane Avenue, which was just beginning to get its morning traffic, and she thought about it, and she was, without quite being able to name it yet, something other than fine. Donna called on Monday at 10 in the morning, as promised. The October event was a dinner for 60, hosted annually by one of the hotel's long-standing corporate partners. Black tie. 6 courses. The kind of engagement where every element was expected to be flawless and where flawless was not considered an achievement so much as a basic requirement. The budget was generous in a way that made Nadia recalculate twice to confirm she had read it correctly. Donna told her she had 2 days to decide, which was Donna's version of urgency, and rang off. Nadia sat with it for an hour. She called Priya, who was better at assessing logistical reach than she was, and described the scope. Priya said, "We can do it if we hire 2 more people for the week." Nadia said, "I'll call you back." She called Donna and said yes before the day was out. She did not call the number at the bottom of the previous Saturday's message. She had saved it, labeled it with 2 initials and nothing else, and she looked at it occasionally the way you look at a door you are not ready to open. 3 days passed. She worked. The business had its own momentum now, a small collection of ongoing contracts and one-off bookings that kept her and her team moving through the weeks without too much space for unstructured thought. She was grateful for this. She had constructed her days precisely to avoid unstructured thought, which was where Marcus lived, which was where the old version of herself lived, the one who had believed things that turned out to be less permanent than they had seemed. On Thursday, a delivery arrived at the commercial kitchen. A case of wine, good wine, the kind that required a moment to look at before you set it down, with a card that said only, "For the closeout drinks you never get to have." AK. She stood with the card for longer than she would have admitted. That evening she replied to the text from Saturday. She wrote, "Thank you for the introduction to Arthur. And for Monday's call." She read it back. Added, "And for the wine." Then deleted "and for the wine" because it felt like too much. Then put it back because deleting it felt like too little. She sent it with the wine line included and then put the phone face down on the counter and went to cut onions for no particular reason. He replied 20 minutes later, "You're welcome for all 3. That was all. No follow-up. No question. No pull toward anything. She found this, to her mild irritation, extremely effective. Elena found out about the wine delivery through Priya, who had been in the kitchen when it arrived and who had mentioned it to Owen at dinner and whose information therefore reached Elena by Friday morning. Elena appeared at the kitchen at 9:15 with 2 coffees and a facial expression that contained a significant amount of information. "The wine," Elena said, setting a coffee in front of Nadia. "It was a professional courtesy," Nadia said. "A case," Elena said. "That's 12 bottles, Nadia. He runs a hotel. He sent them to you specifically." Nadia said nothing. She turned back to the prep work on the counter. "Tell me about him," Elena said. "He owns the Korolev Grand. He saw me at your party. He introduced me to Arthur Venn, who is a potential client. He sent wine. That's the whole story." Elena was quiet for a moment, which was never good. Elena's silences had texture. "Did you look him up?" she said. "Not yet." "I did. Nadia turned around. Elena had her phone in her hand and was looking at it with the expression of someone who has found more than they expected to find. He's not just a hotel owner, she said. The hotels are the part that shows. The part underneath is, she paused, choosing words. It's complicated, Nadia. There are names attached to him in news articles from a few years ago. Court documents that got sealed. His name comes up in things that are not about hospitality. Nadia took the phone. She read what was on the screen. She handed it back. How do you feel about that? Elena said, carefully. I feel like I should talk to him directly. Elena blinked. Most people would feel like they should run in the other direction. Most people didn't watch him walk across a crowded terrace at a party to make sure a conversation got corrected, Nadia said. She picked up her coffee. I'll talk to him. Then I'll decide how I feel. Elena looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, with a quiet certainty, the version of you from 3 years ago would not have done this. No, Nadia agreed. She wouldn't have. She called him that afternoon. Not a text, a call, because she had decided that what she needed to say required a voice. He picked up on the second ring. Nadia. She had not told him she was going to call. The fact that he recognized her number without her identifying herself was information she filed away. I want to meet, she said. To talk about something that isn't the October dinner. A pause. Not a hesitant pause. A considering one. Tomorrow. 12 o'clock. There's a coffee place on Aldrich Street, the one that doesn't have a sign. He said it as if he expected her to know it, and because she had been on Aldrich Street a dozen times and had always been curious about the unmarked door, she did know it. Fine, she said. Fine, he agreed, and ended the call. The coffee place on Aldrich Street turned out to be the kind of place that existed specifically for people who did not want to be seen and who could afford to be very comfortable while not being seen. It was small, impeccably quiet, and staffed by a woman who greeted Alexei by a slight incline of her head and then vanished. He was already there when she arrived. He stood when she came in, not a performance of courtesy but the genuine reflex of someone who had been raised in it, and she sat down across from him with her coat still on and her hands folded on the table and she looked at him directly. I know what Elena found, she said. I read it myself after she told me. I want you to tell me if it's true. He did not look away. He did not deflect. He said, some of it is. Some of it is not. The parts that are true, I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Tell me the true parts, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, and he spoke without the careful managed language of someone managing an image. He told her what the business had been when he inherited it from his father, 12 years ago. Not a hospitality empire. Something older and less clean. The hotels came later, legitimate, genuinely, because he had made a deliberate and sustained choice to move away from the other thing. That choice had taken years. Some of what it had cost was visible in court documents, because you do not change what a business is without those changes being contested and some of those contests becoming public. There are people I protect, he said. People who work for me. People who are connected to me. I keep them out of the part of my history that I am moving away from. That is not always a small job. Are you still in it? She asked. The other thing. Less every year, he said. That's the honest answer. It's not finished. But it's smaller. She absorbed this. She turned her coffee cup a small amount on the saucer. Why are you telling me this? She said. You could have given me a version that was cleaner. You asked for the true parts, he said. And I found, after Saturday, that I am unwilling to give you anything other than the true parts. She looked at him for a moment. He held her gaze without effort. That's a significant thing to say to someone you met 6 days ago, she said. Yes, he agreed. It is. The coffee was very good. The room was very quiet. Outside, the street was doing its afternoon business. She thought about Marcus. Not with pain, exactly, more with the particular clarity that comes when you have been shown a contrast and the contrast is so stark it rearranges your understanding of the original thing. Marcus had told her stories about himself for 3 years, and none of them had involved anything as uncomfortable as the truth. He had never said, "Here is what I am," including the parts that are difficult. He had only ever said, "Here is what I want you to see." Alexei Korolev had just sat across from her in an unmarked coffee place and handed her things she could use against him without being asked twice. "I need to think," she said. "Of course. This doesn't affect the October dinner," she added. "That's a professional arrangement and I intend to follow through." "I know," he said. "I didn't invite you here to discuss the October dinner." She stood. He stood. "I'll be in touch," she said. "I know," he said again. Not with certainty about her answer. With certainty about her, that she was a person who followed through on what she said, who meant what she said she meant, and who would contact him when she had thought about it and not before. She went home. She sat in her apartment with Harold on the arm of the chair beside her and she thought about it for a long time. She thought about what it meant to choose something that was not simple. She had chosen simple because simple had felt safe after Marcus, and safe had felt like enough. But safety that comes from making yourself smaller is not real safety. She had known this for a while without quite being able to act on it. She thought about a man who had walked across a rooftop to correct a story. She thought about 12 bottles of wine and a 2-initial label on her phone. She thought about being looked at, not with the hungry assessment of someone deciding your value, but with the quiet attention of someone who was recording you accurately. She picked up the phone. She wrote, "I've thought about it." Then erased it. Wrote, "I'd like to have dinner." Then erased that too. She sat with the blank message screen for several minutes. Then she wrote, "I think the story you told me today is braver than most people manage." And sent it before she could revise it. His reply came while she was still staring at the screen. It said, "Then you understand why I told it." She put the phone face down. Harold chose that moment to place one paw on her knee, which was as close to affection as he ever got. She left her hand where it was and looked at the ceiling and felt, for the first time in a long while, something other than contained. It was slightly terrifying. She decided that was probably the correct reaction to it. The October event was announced in the city's business pages as a private corporate dinner at the Korolev Grand. It listed the hosts, the date, and the venue. It did not list the caterer, because the caterer was not the story. The story was the guest list, which included the kind of names that appear on the fronts of buildings. Nadia had spent 3 weeks in preparation. She had hired 2 additional people for the event week, both of them calm and precise, both of them Priya's recommendations, which meant they were better than Nadia's own shortlist would have been. She had refined the menu through 4 drafts with a chef she had worked with twice before and trusted completely. She had visited the kitchen at the Korolev Grand twice more, at Donna's invitation, and the 3rd visit she had walked in knowing exactly where everything was, and Donna had greeted her with the slight warmth of someone who has made an assessment and feels settled about it. She and Alexei had had dinner once in the weeks between. Not at the hotel. At a small Italian place on Cartwell Road that he had chosen because, he said, it was owned by a family he liked and they did not take photographs of their guests. They had talked for 3 hours. About work, about the city, about the kind of things people talk about when they are deciding whether they are comfortable being honest with each other. He had asked her questions that nobody asked her, not because they were intrusive but because they were specific, because he was paying attention to her actual answers and building the next question from them rather than from a script. She had learned things about him in return. He had grown up between 2 countries, his father's city and this one, and he carried both of them in a way that was not quite belonging to either. He slept very little. He could not cook anything except one dish, which was a particular soup that his grandmother had made, and he was defensive about his inability in all other areas of the kitchen. He found most social events tedious and attended them because the alternative was a reputation for arrogance, which was more trouble than the events. He had been in one serious relationship, 5 years ago, which had ended because the woman had required him to be simpler than he was, and he had tried very hard to be simpler, and the trying had been worse for both of them than the ending. She had listened to all of this and had given back versions of her own equivalent stories, and the evening had felt, in a way she did not try to put a name to until she was in the car home, like being recognized. That was the word she kept returning to. Not desired, not charmed, not impressed. Recognized. As if there was a version of herself that had been in the room all along, waiting for someone to look in the right direction. She was careful with it. She had been careful with things like this before and had still been wrong. But she was beginning to understand that the caution she had been living with was not the same as wisdom. Wisdom would have let her be cautious while still moving forward. What she had been doing was standing still and calling it a choice. She was not standing still anymore. She was aware of this. She was also aware that the ground she was now standing on was different, less familiar, and that this was not a reason to go back. On the evening of the October event, she arrived at the Korolev Grand at 3 in the afternoon and did not stop moving until the final course went up at 9:40. The kitchen ran like the timelines she had written by hand, every handoff landing on its mark, every temperature exactly right, the service team moving with the quiet confidence of people who had been given clear instructions and trusted to execute them. When the dessert went out and she stood for a moment in the brief pause before the closeout, Donna appeared beside her and said, without fanfare, "This was the best service we've had in this room." Nadia nodded. "Thank you," she said. She meant it without theatricality. She was in the process of managing the breakdown when she became aware of a change in the room's atmosphere. She felt it before she identified the source of it, a subtle recalibration of attention among the guests, the way a crowd shifts when something unexpected enters its field. She looked toward the entrance to the dining room. Marcus Webb was there. He was with 2 other men, in the way that people come to corporate events with 2 other men, dressed correctly, holding a glass, navigating the room toward someone they already know. He had not seen Nadia yet. She was near the service entrance, in her black apron, her hair in its usual low braid. She was, from across the room, invisible in exactly the way she had trained herself to be. She watched him for a moment. She waited for the familiar contraction in her chest, the old reaction, the one she had learned to manage and had been managing for 2 years. It didn't come. She thought about that for exactly 1 second. Then she turned back to the closeout. She was stacking the last of the service equipment when she heard her name, and it was not Marcus's voice. She turned. Alexei was standing in the doorway between the dining room and the service corridor. He was in the kind of suit he always wore, dark, precisely fitted, and he had the look of someone who has moved through a room full of important people without being impressed by any of them and has now found the one person in the building he was looking for. "A moment," he said, which meant, "Come with me." She followed him to the corridor. He turned to face her. "Webb is here," he said. "Did you see him?" "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "And?" She looked back at him steadily. "And I'm finishing my closeout." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile but the thing that lives just behind one. "Good," he said. "He doesn't have the effect on me that he did a month ago," she said, and realized as she said it that it was completely true and that she had not known how true it was until this moment. "No," Alexei said. "I didn't think he would." She tilted her head. "Why not?" "Because you've been too busy being yourself," he said. It was simple and direct and it landed precisely where he had aimed it. She pressed her lips together. Not to suppress emotion, exactly, but because she was not yet ready to show all of what she felt, and she was a person who moved at her own pace toward things, even when those things were good. "I have to get back," she said. I know, he said. After. He said it the way he said most things, as a fact rather than a request. After. After the closeout. After the work. He would be here after. She went back to the kitchen. She finished the breakdown. She paid out Danny and the two new people and told Priya she had been extraordinary, which was true. She changed out of her apron and washed her hands and stood for a moment in the kitchen, which was quiet now and slightly warm from the evening, and she breathed. The dining room had largely cleared. The corporate guests had moved to the adjoining reception space for the final drinks portion of the evening. Nadia walked through the empty dining room to return to the lobby, and she had almost reached the other side of it when she heard Marcus's voice, close. Nadia. I thought that was you. She turned. He was standing with one of the two men he had arrived with, holding a drink, and he had the expression of someone who had been tracking her movement across the room and had timed this to seem casual. He looked at her coat, she had already changed out of her work clothes, and then at her face, and then performed a small confusion. Are you a guest tonight? I didn't realize. I catered the dinner, she said. His face did something she could not quite read. Right, he said, in the tone of someone recalculating. It's good that you're getting bigger contracts. The man beside him said nothing. He had a look that people get when they realize they have been brought into a conversation that has a history they don't understand. It's a good contract, Nadia said evenly. The hotel group is expanding. I'll be working with them quite a bit going forward. Marcus nodded. He was about to say something. She could see the social machinery of him assembling the next comment, the one that would position him favorably, the one that would manage the distance between what he had implied at Elena's party and what was in front of him now. He didn't get to say it. Alexei Korolev came through the door from the reception area, looked across the room, and moved toward Nadia with the unhurried directness of someone who has decided where he is going and sees no reason to disguise it. He stopped beside her, not in front of her, beside her, as he always did, and addressed Marcus's companion first with a brief acknowledgement that was entirely professional, then looked at Nadia. Arthur Venn is asking about you, he said. He has a question about the spring calendar. It was nothing theatrical. It was simply, the owner of the hotel is looking for you by name. The owner of the hotel treats you as someone worth looking for. The owner of the hotel is standing beside you at your shoulder as if this is a natural place to stand. Marcus looked at Alexei. He did the calibration that she had watched him do at Elena's party, the recognition, the recalibration, the swift internal adjustment. This time there was no recovery laugh. There was a pause, and a nod, and a good to see you directed at nobody in particular, and then he and his companion had drifted toward the edge of the room and were moving away. Nadia watched them go. She did not feel triumph. She considered this and was glad of it. Triumph would have meant she cared, and she was discovering, with something close to relief, that she no longer cared as much as she had believed she did. She felt something quieter. Something that did not have a single word for it in any language she knew. It was close to, settled. She turned to Alexei. Arthur Venn has a question about the spring calendar? He does, Alexei said. He mentioned it half an hour ago. It was a convenient moment to deliver the message. She looked at him for a long moment. You are very good at convenient moments. It's a skill, he said, without apology. She almost laughed. She let it out this time, a small, real laugh, not performed, not managed, just arrived. He watched it with an expression that was doing several things at once and that she was beginning to be able to read. She went to find Arthur Venn, who did, in fact, have a question about the spring calendar, and who in the course of asking it also inquired about the possibility of a monthly retainer arrangement for his company's events, which was a conversation that ended with Nadia standing very still and holding her composure together while something that felt close to a shift in the weather moved through her. She found Alexei afterward, near the window in the now quiet dining room. He offered a retainer, she said. I know, he said. I suggested he consider it, a few weeks ago. She stopped. She considered this. Did you arrange the introduction at Elena's party? Was that also arranged? The introduction was genuine, he said. The suggestion about the retainer was also genuine. I believe your work is exceptional and I said so. What Arthur does with that opinion is his own business. She looked out at the city, which was doing its night business below the window, all movement and light and the ceaseless activity of a place that does not stop for individual stories. She started. Stopped. Started again. You've done a lot for my business in a short time. Yes, he said. I want to be clear that I don't need that, she said. I'm not saying I'm not grateful. I am. But I need you to understand that the business was real before you and would have been real without you. I've been building it for 3 years and it's mine. I know that, he said. That's partly why I recommended it. She looked at him. I don't make recommendations I don't believe in, he said. It would cost me more than it would gain me. I recommended your work because your work is excellent. Not because of anything else. She believed him. She had been looking for reasons not to and had not found any. Then thank you, she said. For the recommendation and for the record. He nodded. They stood at the window for a moment in the quiet of the empty dining room. Below, the city moved and lit and went about its infinite ordinary business. I'd like to have dinner again, she said. Not a business dinner. He turned to look at her. When? Saturday, she said. The Italian place on Cartwell Road. Saturday, he agreed. She gathered her things and said goodnight to Donna, who told her the feedback from the guests had already been exceptional. She walked through the lobby and out into the October night air and stood on the steps of the Korolev Grand for a moment before she walked to her van. The city was cool and wide and full of its own sound. She stood in it without hurrying away from it. She thought about the evening, not Marcus specifically, not the closeout, not even the retainer offer, though that was extraordinary, but the moment in the dining room where she had turned around and the old reaction had not come. The contraction, the management, the practiced stillness over pain. It had not come. She had seen him and had felt, instead, something like the absence of something. Like discovering a splinter you've adjusted to for so long that you stopped noticing it is gone. She had not healed because of Alexei Korolev. She understood that clearly. She had been healing on her own, slowly, in the years of quiet work and small days and Harold and Elena and the folded timelines in the passenger seat. She had been doing the work without knowing it was working. What he had done was different. He had been the first person, in 2 years, who had looked in the right direction and seen her standing there, and had then walked toward her rather than past. That was its own thing. That was not rescue. It was recognition. She walked to the van. She started it. She drove home through the October night with the heater running and the city moving around her, and she was, for the first time in a long time, entirely present in her own life, not behind it, not underneath it, not managing it from a careful distance. She was in it. She drove home to Crane Avenue and parked and went upstairs and fed Harold and stood at the kitchen window with her coffee and she thought about Saturday. Then she thought about the spring calendar. Then she thought about the retainer, which made her put the coffee down and sit at the kitchen table with a notepad and start writing figures. She wrote for an hour. The numbers were good. Better than good. She put the pen down and sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling of her small apartment and thought about all the ways a life can change while you are doing ordinary things in ordinary kitchens on ordinary mornings. She thought about a woman in an apron on a rooftop, holding a clipboard while someone tried to make her small. She thought about who had been standing at the railing of that same rooftop, watching. She thought about what it meant to be seen, not as a version of yourself that someone else preferred, but as the actual thing, the real and complicated and working and unfinished thing. She looked at the notepad with the spring figures on it. She picked up the pen. She wrote, at the top of the page, in her neat practical handwriting, next year. Then she started planning it. The room was quiet and the city was outside and Harold was somewhere making his private cat decisions and Nadia Cole sat at her kitchen table in her apartment on Crane Avenue and planned her next year with the focused and very particular energy of a person who has stopped waiting for permission and remembered, at last, who she was before she forgot. She did not make herself small that night. It was the second time that had been true. It would not be the last. And that, the simplicity of it, the plain factual truth of it, was the thing she held as the city went quiet outside her window and the night came in and she kept writing.